The story began in a quiet hospital room. A young man lay in bed, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Hovering above him, suspended in mid-air, was a strange door glowing with an ominous red aura. He stared at it in disbelief and muttered to himself, wondering if he was seeing things. Curious and unsettled, he got up and began cautiously examining the door from all angles. He noted aloud that it seemed to be floating without any support, with nothing behind it, and speculated whether it was some kind of magic trick. Compelled by a deep, inexplicable pull, Shen Ye reached out and placed his hand on the cold brass handle. With a faint click, the mechanism gave way. In the next instant, he slipped and accidentally fell through it. He landed hard on hard ground, the air thick with a blood scent. Moments later, he stumbled to his feet, finding himself in complete darkness. He whispered to himself in disbelief, questioning how there could be an entire space hidden inside the door. The place was pitch black, and he had no idea where he was. Calling out into the void, he asked if anyone was there. Then he heard something, faint at first, scraping, wet, and getting closer. Out of the shadows emerged a red skeleton, its 3 glowing green eyes fixed on him, blood dripping from its jagged mouth. Terror washed over him. His legs trembled and his face turned pale. Panicking, he exclaimed to himself that he needed to get out of there and bolted in the direction he came from, the monstrous creature now chasing him. Back in the hospital room, he burst through the portal and slammed the door shut behind him. Gasping for breath, he stammered an apology to whatever that thing was and wished it a nice day. He collapsed onto the bed, his heart still racing, muttering that the world he had just encountered was insane, and that he hoped the creature wouldn't follow him. Then silence fell. Before his eyes, the strange door began to fade, slowly dissolving into thin air. He stared at the spot where it had been and questioned whether the door had truly vanished. Suddenly, a deep, eerie voice echoed inside his mind. It congratulated him, calling him human, and told him that he had awakened the ability known as World Link. The voice declared that it had finally found him. Panicked, he jumped up and looked around wildly, demanding to know who was speaking. The voice, calmer now, urged him not to panic. It explained that it was trapped in another world and was communicating telepathically. It warned him that the interdimensional connection was weak, and that if he wanted to survive, he would need to follow its instructions exactly. The young man, still shaken, asked what was going on. The voice instructed him to open his bag and told him he would find a statue inside. Still confused but following the command, he opened his bag and, to his shock, pulled out a golden skeleton statue. His hands trembled as he stared at it in disbelief, questioning whether this was what the voice meant. The voice confirmed it was indeed the cursed statue of the wicked Ghost King. It explained that someone had deliberately placed the statue near him, intending to curse, kill, and steal his soul. But somehow, he had survived. Then, without warning, a torrent of unfamiliar memories surged through him. Clutching his head, he began to piece the truth together. He was not the original owner of this body. The body belonged to a middle school student named Shen Ye. That soul had been destroyed by the statue's curse. And him, he recalled dying from overwork back on Blue Star. Somehow, his soul had travelled across worlds and taken over Shen Ye's body. The voice returned, now more urgent than before. It told him that when the curse failed to kill, it instead granted something far worse, unimaginable power. Power accumulated over millions of years by harvesting souls. As the voice spoke, the statue in his hands began to shake violently. Cracks spread across its surface. Dust began pouring from its eyes. The young man gasped, stunned as he watched it crumble into dust right before his eyes. Just then, the strange voice issued a firm command, instructing the young man to summon the door again. Startled, he echoed the word in disbelief, clearly surprised by the request. The voice confirmed it, explaining that the door now belonged to him and could appear at will thanks to his newly awakened ability, World Link. As he focused on the thought, the door reappeared before him, shimmering into existence in mid-air. Almost instantly, a strange notification appeared in front of him, stating that because he had been polite when he passed through the door earlier, he had earned the title Polite Person. Another message followed, explaining that Polite Person was a grey, damaged title. Equipping it would grant him a passive bonus. When he behaved politely, others would form a slightly better impression of him. Reading this, the young man observed to himself that the title functioned much like a passive skill, similar to an equipable trait in a video game. The voice, now sounding weaker, continued speaking. It warned him that its power was fading, quickly. Before disappearing completely, it gave him a final warning. The person who had planted the cursed statue near him would soon realize that he was still alive, and they would come for him. In fact, they might already be on their way. Panic surged through our hero, and he demanded to know who the voice truly was and why it had chosen to reveal all of this to him. The voice, now distant and faint, replied that it needed his help. It revealed that the realm the young man had entered earlier was known as the Nightmare Realm, a place where the voice itself had been trapped for a long time. It urged him to grow stronger and to descend into the depths of that realm. If he could one day reach the deepest part and free the being behind the voice, he would be richly rewarded. But until then, it gave one final instruction. He must not die. As the voice vanished, the room fell silent once more. The young man stood still, trying to process everything that had happened. He had only just arrived in this world, and already someone was trying to kill him. Wearing an anxious expression, he searched through Shenye's memories, hoping for some clue as to why he had been targeted. But nothing surfaced. Shenye hadn't seemed to have any enemies at all. The mystery deepened. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he began to think carefully. At that moment, he had no means of defending himself. His best option, he concluded, was to go back through the mysterious door and see if he could obtain another title or ability. But first, he knew he had to equip the Polite Person title. Once that was done, he turned to face the door again. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle, slowly pushing it open. He vividly remembered the terrifying red skeleton from before. Still, he tried to stay calm. He reassured himself that if the skeleton appeared again, he would simply run. As long as he remained close to the door, he reasoned, he would have a quick escape route. As he stepped into the Nightmare Realm again, he whispered under his breath, thinking that while the skeleton certainly seemed powerful, he might be able to defeat it if necessary. But then another thought crossed his mind. Perhaps he could talk to it. After all, he reminded himself, communication was one of humanity's greatest tools, and a skeleton, technically, was a dead human. Maybe, just maybe, they could find common ground. Equipped with the Polite Person title, he figured he had a better shot at diplomacy. Standing before the monstrous creature, nervous but determined, he greeted the skeleton respectfully and even apologized for disturbing it earlier. He expressed a sincere desire to become friends. At first, the skeleton did not respond with hostility, which gave him a sense of relief. The title appeared to be working. Encouraged, he bowed slightly and continued his apology, explaining that he hadn't meant to interrupt its meal. But just as he finished speaking, the skeleton suddenly raised its arm and swung at him in a brutal attempt to crush him. Reacting, instinctively, the young man leapt backward, just in time to avoid the massive blow, which smashed into the ground where he had been standing only seconds before. Our hero's frustration reached a boiling point. He shouted at the skeleton, demanding if it really had to be so violent when all he wanted was a simple chat. However, the skeleton didn't respond. With a single swipe of its massive hand, it destroyed the door, the one that allowed our hero to travel between realms. The force of the strike sent him crashing backward into his hospital bed. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he muttered to himself that it had been far too close. It seemed that if the door was destroyed, it simply vanished. He cursed under his breath, lamenting that grey titles were utterly useless, and wondering what new title he had earned. A screen suddenly appeared in front of him, displaying a message. Titles can only be earned once per day. You've already used today's opportunity. Try again tomorrow. Our hero narrowed his eyes in frustration, muttering bitterly that he couldn't just keep farming titles endlessly. Refusing to give up, he gritted his teeth and summoned the door again, muttering under his breath that if the skeleton kept blocking him, he wouldn't get a better title the next day. With the assassin potentially showing up at any moment, there was no time to waste. It was now or never. He was going all in on his past life as a top-tier salesman, determined to close the deal. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to the other dimension and greeted the skeleton with a bright, forced smile, apologizing for the interruption. Without warning, the skeleton lunged, attempting to rip him apart with its jagged, razor-sharp fangs. But the attack was futile. The skeleton only managed to destroy the door, while our hero skillfully dodged and slipped out of its grasp once more. Reappearing safely on his side, our hero met the skeleton's confused stare. With a calm, almost smug expression, he placed a hand on his sleeve and told the skeleton it was pointless. It couldn't eat him, and he could travel freely between worlds. The only option left was to talk. Frustrated, the skeleton roared and swung its enormous arm with terrifying force, smashing the door again. But the attack was in vain, as our hero teleported away once more, escaping with ease. When he reappeared for the third time, he grinned at the skeleton and suggested it was time to hear his proposition. The skeleton, now realizing it couldn't kill him, turned to leave, its patience finally wearing thin. He called out to the skeleton, pleading for it not to leave. In a last-ditch effort, he pointed at the visible injuries on the skeleton's body, noting that when it had been chomping down on people, a new bone had been slowly growing from the break in its left arm. He also pointed out that its skull, ribs, and spine were all damaged. The skeleton stopped, its attention now focused on its wounds. Seeing the opening, our hero pulled out his phone and showed the skeleton an image of a bottle of medicine. He explained that, while he couldn't let the skeleton eat him, their world had many things that could help its bones. He specifically mentioned calcium tablets designed to heal fractures, adding that it wasn't just calcium. There were countless supplements and vitamins far more nutritious than he was. With a flourish, he spread his arms wide, offering the skeleton his help in obtaining these items if they became friends. He even quoted a saying from his world, "I'll take a bullet for my friend," saying that buying some calcium tablets was nothing compared to that. Though, in the skeleton's case, taking a bullet probably wouldn't be much of a problem. With his pitch made, our hero looked the skeleton in the eye and asked, "So, what do you say?" Suddenly, the skeleton gathered a ball of purple energy in its right arm. Our hero reacted instantly, retreating toward the door while muttering under his breath that things were still not going well and that he would have to try something else. At that moment, a special piece of paper materialized in front of him, bearing the image of a skeleton's skull. Shortly after, the skeleton transmitted some information about itself, along with the details of a contract. The message read, "You have received a contract. Signer, progenitor of shadowed bones, devourer of corpses, defeated lord of the underworld, Mictlantecuhtli, Skull, Legion, 5th Division, Battlefield Acquisition Officer." Our hero's eyes widened in surprise as he stared at the paper. He exclaimed that it was a contract and that it had worked. However, as he scanned the details, his expression shifted. He wondered why there were ellipses after the name, then sighed, feeling disappointed. He muttered to himself that it seemed like just a low-ranking pencil pusher. Another message appeared, sent by the skeleton. Contract content. Equal exchange. Addendum. 7 millennia ago, humanity, with its talent for culture, art, and technology, caused the eternal bell of fate to toll 12 times. Even the divine beings took notice. Human, I hope you can help me regain my strength. I do not make contracts with anyone but divine beings, so you must understand the value of this agreement. It is a fair contract. Should either party become dissatisfied, it may be terminated at any time. Sign your name below to make the contract binding. Gathering a surge of energy in his finger, our hero signed the contract. A moment later, a description of our hero appeared on the screen before him. Shen Ye, the human who overcame the curse of the fallen evil spirits, gatekeeper of nightmares and reality, sole controller of the two realms. Our hero stared at the description, impressed by the weight of his title. He thought to himself that he was kind of a big deal. With the contract now complete, our hero returned home. His father looked at him with concern and reminded him that he had just gotten out of the hospital. He said that if our hero felt unwell, he should tell them immediately. His mother smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. She suggested that he take it easy for a few days, not stress about anything else, and drink a tonic on an empty stomach, as it would do him good. She handed him a small bag, and his father added that the calcium tablets our hero had asked for were also inside. With a shy smile, our hero thanked them both. His mother gently squeezed his shoulder and reassured him that there was no need to thank them, as his health and safety were all that mattered. For a moment, our hero felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in his past life as an orphan. He whispered to himself that it was so nice to feel cared for by a family. Just then, a knock came at the door. When our hero opened it, 2 officers stepped inside. The older officer showed his badge and said that they were from the East Precinct and were there regarding Shen Ye's case.
With a somber expression, the officer began to explain that incidents like this occurred far too often. Sudden, unexplainable, and impossible to predict. He said there was no warning, no escape, and that in such cases, survival itself was a stroke of luck. The fact that Shen Yi had made it out alive, he emphasized, was nothing short of a miracle. Shen Yi, his gaze distant and haunted, muttered to himself that the real Shen Yi had been killed, murdered by some monstrous entity unleashed by a cursed summoning. His expression then became sad, and he questioned aloud whether people were simply expected to surrender to fate the next time something like this happened. The older officer had no response and avoided his gaze. It was the younger one, arms crossed and composed, who stepped forward. He acknowledged Shen Ye's anger and said it was justified, but informed him that the higher-ups had made their decision. The hospital would be shut down permanently, marked off limits. There would be no more victims. Shen Yi glanced at the young man and noticed the confident gleam in his eyes. He noted to himself that the 3 stars on the badge meant the officer was a sergeant, and a remarkably young one at that. He offered a faint smile and thanked him for the update, though admitted he had a nagging suspicion that someone was specifically targeting him. The young sergeant, lowering his gaze slightly, assured him calmly that as far as they could tell, Shen Yi was just a middle schooler with a small, uneventful social circle. They hadn't found anyone with a motive against him. As the officers turned to leave, the sergeant added that this was all for now, and they wouldn't trouble him any further. Watching them disappear down the corridor, Shen Ye's expression turned grim. He whispered to himself that the curse, cast by that wicked ghost, was terrifyingly powerful. The police couldn't handle it. In fact, they seemed scared of it. And Shen Yi, he had just been a regular kid. Why would anyone use something so overwhelmingly dangerous on him? Just then, the young sergeant returned, glancing around cautiously as if to ensure they were alone. Shen Yi blinked in surprise and asked why he had come back. The sergeant handed him a card and told him to call directly if anything strange occurred. Then, just as quietly, he slipped away into the shadows. Shen Yi stared down at the card and muttered that perhaps not all police officers were useless after all. Still, doubt lingered in his mind. He wondered whether he could truly trust the young sergeant, or if the man even had the ability to help him. It was clear the sergeant wasn't entirely following orders. And if even the government couldn't do anything, what could one lone sergeant hope to achieve? His fists clenched as a chilling realization struck him. Now that word had spread about his survival, whoever was behind all of this wouldn't let it go. What if they targeted the family of the original Shinyi, the real owner of this body? Determination ignited in his eyes. He knew he had to get stronger immediately. Raising his hand, he summoned a metal door. With the cocky grin of someone confident in his absurd new reality, he called out, asking if Big Skelly was around. With a thunderous crash, the towering skeleton dropped from the ceiling and landed before him in dramatic fashion. Grinning, Shinyi held up a small bag and informed the skeleton that he had brought the calcium tablets he'd requested. But the skeleton ignored the bag entirely, instead pointing at something tucked away in Shinyi's sleeve. Curious, Shinyi raised an eyebrow and pulled out a small vial, asking if the skeleton meant the tonic instead. In response, the skeleton summoned a piece of parchment through a pulse of spiritual energy. On it was written, "The other party has shown interest in your tonic. As a battlefield acquisition officer, the giant skeleton offers a relic in trade, taken from the spoils of war. Item: lower-tier nightmare crystal, a relic forged by high elves, ancient enemies of the undead legion. Imbued with long-lost magical knowledge, it had the ability to instantly transfer combat expertise, skills, or intelligence to its user. Note: in the realm of nightmares, war was the eternal constant. All knowledge and all progress served the singular purpose of perfecting combat." Shunye's eyes lit up with excitement as he took the crystal. A relic that could upload skills directly into his mind? That sounded incredible. He didn't hesitate for a second. He crushed the crystal in his palm. A blinding flash followed, and a system message immediately appeared before his eyes. Skill acquired. Moonlit Deerwalk. Another window slid into view, displaying the details. Moonlit Deerwalk, an entry-level movement technique once used by elven foot soldiers. It improved agility and footwork, allowing for swift, silent repositioning in battle. Feeling the new energy course through him, Shunyi clenched his fists. This was progress. He was one step closer to surviving whatever came next. After some time, Shunyi decided it was best to close the gate. He had come to the conclusion that he needed to study the technique more carefully before attempting anything further. Just then, a strange knock echoed through the room, sending a chill down his spine. The system notified him that the first technique, Deer Under the Moon, required 3 dexterity points, yet Shinyi only had 2. Before he could even begin to comprehend what was happening, a cold, chilling voice echoed through the room. The speaker, filled with disbelief, questioned how our hero could possibly be alive. Turning quickly, our hero spotted a shadowy figure at the window, a twisted silhouette that revealed itself to be a grotesque man. The stranger soon identified himself as an assassin. The killer growled that if the curse couldn't finish Shinyi, then he would do it himself. Without hesitation, the killer launched forward with a brutal jumping attack. Shinyi, driven by instinct, barely managed to dodge the blow using a technique he had only recently unlocked. The killer paused briefly, smirking while drawing a knife and firearm. He remarked that Shunye's dexterity was higher than he had expected. Shunye's heart raced. He wondered whether this monster had truly come to take his life, right then and there. Thinking quickly, Shunyi activated his politeness skill and calmly asked the intruder what he was looking for in such a place. The killer responded with a cold laugh, calling Shunyi a pathetic little bug and declaring that he had come to extinguish his life. Desperately, Shunyi attempted to activate his elven abilities, but he lacked the necessary characteristics. The killer, losing patience, raised his firearm and taunted that no one could dodge a bullet, then fired. The bullet missed, but Shunyi felt adrenaline flooding through his body. The system buzzed once more, announcing that skill absorption was available and a level up was possible. Shunyi muttered that the timing couldn't have been worse, but wasted no time. He absorbed politeness, gaining an additional point in dexterity, just enough to unlock another technique. With renewed agility, Shunyi avoided the next attack and quickly formed a plan. Relying on his cunning, he summoned a metal gate and slipped behind it in a blur, leaving a glowing green trail behind him. The killer, enraged, stormed after him, shouting that no cheap trick would let Shunyi escape. As the assassin passed through the gate, he entered a horrifying realm of nightmares. He looked around cautiously, alert for any danger, only to discover that Shunyi was already behind him. With a quiet farewell, Shunyi whispered goodbye and slammed the metal door shut. The killer lunged to reopen it, but the gate vanished. In its place loomed a monstrous skeletal creature, eyes glowing with malevolence. The air filled with the grisly sound of snapping bones and tearing flesh. Meanwhile, Shunyi leaned against a nearby wall, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had narrowly escaped death. He admitted to himself how terrifying the experience had been and how unprepared he was for such a sudden attack. Just then, the system delivered another message. He had greatly pleased his contract partner. As a reward, Shunyi was granted the Pale Shadow's crown and a silver military badge. Upon examining the items, he discovered that the crown would allow him to disguise himself as an elf, and the badge would enable him to travel to the land of elves. Intrigued, Shunyi placed the crown on his head. Instantly, his body began to transform. He glanced at his reflection in his phone's front-facing camera and confirmed what he felt. He had truly become an elf. A smile crept across his face as he thought to himself that this could very well be the beginning of something extraordinary. Just then, Shunyi heard a knock at the door and froze. His first thought was grim. He wondered if another killer had come for his life. However, the voice that followed sounded unexpectedly kind. The person on the other side expressed relief, saying that if Shunyi was all right, it was good to hear. He then introduced himself as Hank. Shunyi searched through the memories of the body's previous owner and soon recognized the name. Hank had been the closest friend of the former guardian of this body, and Shunyi recalled that he had gone to the hospital that day to visit him. Taking a cautious step forward, Shunyi opened the door. Without warning, Hank threw his arms around him, holding him tightly. His voice trembled as he admitted how worried he had been. Tears welled up in Hank's eyes as he apologized, saying it was his fault, that if it hadn't been for him, Shunyi wouldn't have ended up in such a dangerous situation. Shunyi reassured him that there was no need to feel guilty, that he didn't blame him for it, and that he was doing fine. At that moment, his mother entered the room and paused in surprise at the sight of Hank. Shunyi invited her in and asked gently why she had come alone, and where his father was. She explained that his father had gone to visit his grandfather to collect a supply of special restorative pills, extremely rare medicine that even the wealthy struggled to obtain. Hank was taken aback, commenting that Shunyi's parents must be incredibly devoted to go to such lengths. He urged Shunyi to focus on his recovery and reminded him that school was waiting. Entrance exams were approaching. Shunyi paused at the mention of exams. He recalled that the previous owner of this body had still been a student, an exceptional one at that, with ambitions of enrolling in a prestigious institution. But now those exams had already passed him by. As he reflected on this, Shunyi realized how unfamiliar the entrance exams of this world were compared to the ones he had known before. More pressing, though, was the danger he now faced. A literal hunt had been declared on him, and attending school could very well cost him his life. His face darkened at the thought, which his mother immediately noticed. She stepped closer and gently hugged him, trying to soothe the storm of fear and doubt within him. She told him softly that if he didn't want to take the exams, that was perfectly fine. What mattered most to them was that he recovered and regained his strength. Her words, and the warmth in her embrace, washed over Shunyi like sunlight through storm clouds. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel quite so alone. With a faint smile, he assured her that he wasn't as fragile as she feared and told her not to worry about him. He knew then that if he chose to back down, his mother would accept it without protest. But something deep within him refused to surrender. He simply couldn't bear to let them down. He declared that he would go to school the next day, and he would take the exams. As more of the body's memories returned to him, Shunyi discovered that his family had noble blood, though their relationships were strained and distant. His parents had never asked for help from his grandfather before, choosing instead to rely on their own hard work. Now they had swallowed their pride and turned to him, just to obtain those precious, life-saving pills. In Shinye's eyes, they likely believed that their real son was already gone. But he couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. He couldn't let their hearts be broken all over again. And so he made a silent vow. No matter the danger, he would face them. The next day, Shunyi arrived at the prestigious school campus. Determined to acclimate quickly, he spent the morning exploring the layout of the building and diving into the dense textbooks provided for the upcoming exams. With laser focus, he began absorbing as much knowledge as possible, aware that he had little time to prepare. As he studied, he couldn't help but reflect on how different the school culture was compared to what he was used to. The discipline here was strict, the environment intense. But perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. This place was bustling with students, and he figured it would be difficult for any assassin to make a move unnoticed in such a crowded setting. Just as he was turning a page in one of the more challenging textbooks, a fellow student approached and casually informed him that a girl named Zhao Yibing was waiting for him in the hallway. Shunyi dug through the memories of the body's previous owner and remembered her. Zhao Yibing had once been a close friend, or so it seemed. Curious, he made his way to the corridor. Zhao Yibing stood with a cool expression, arms crossed. She didn't waste time. She told him that she had heard he was planning to take the entrance exams and wished him luck. She added that she already knew the format of the first one and was confident she would get into the best school. Shunyi nodded, offering a polite smile. He responded that it was great news and that he was really glad she was doing well. But instead of sharing the moment, Zhao Yibing continued, her voice strangely sharp. She told him that it would be best if he didn't talk to her anymore. Her words caught him off guard, and a murmur rippled through the nearby students, who were now eavesdropping. One of them snickered, asking if the school flower had just rejected him. Zhao Yibing didn't flinch. She said that they weren't on the same level anymore and suggested they just go their separate ways. Shunyi frowned, confused, and asked what was going on, stating that he had only missed one exam. Zhao Yibing's eyes narrowed, and she informed him that she had already deleted his contact. The crowd buzzed louder, laughing and whispering, clearly enjoying the drama. Shunyi stayed calm, his voice level, and reminded her that she used to come to class just to see him. He said that she had always initiated things between them, and he had never asked for anything. A few students nodded in agreement, remembering how Zhao Yibing had clung to him like a shadow when he had been the top student. Now, it felt like she was trying to erase that history. One of Zhao Yibing's friends suddenly stepped in, glaring at Shunyi, accusing him of acting like this after Zhao Yibing had given him so many gifts. Zhao Yibing's composure cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. She said that she had thought their friendship meant something real. Shunyi looked at her, puzzled by the sudden shift, sensing that something about the scene didn't sit right and that it didn't make sense. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and clear, saying that he had accepted her gifts, but he had never accepted her. He noted that there was a difference between the two. The silence that followed was deafening, until it was broken by a wave of laughter and cheers from the crowd. Students clapped and whispered that Shunyi had handled it like a pro. Some even seemed to admire the way he had kept his cool. But Shunyi wasn't proud. Deep down, he sensed that this encounter had been more than just teenage drama. Something else was going on beneath the surface, and he knew he needed to stay alert. After that, Shunyi turned around and coldly told Zhao Yibing that she shouldn't have tried to tie him down with gifts. He added that he could return them if she wanted. Without another word, he raised his middle finger, firmly stating that their friendship was over. Zhao Yibing's friends immediately shouted after him, calling him a pathetic idiot who didn't know what he was doing. The crowd began to turn, with other students siding with Zhao Yibing, criticizing Shun Yi for his behavior. They muttered that, no matter how good his grades were, he was acting like someone beneath them. Zhao Yibing, still processing the confrontation, tried to explain herself. She hadn't meant for things to turn out this way, and now she wasn't sure how to fix it. As she stood there, unsure of what to do, a huge bully suddenly appeared in front of Shun Yi, blocking his path. The bully, Sun Ming, ordered him to stop, saying that Zhao Yibing hadn't finished speaking, so Shun Yi shouldn't have left so brazenly. Shun Yi immediately recognized Sun Ming, a young man known for his size and strength. He coolly replied that he was heading to his class and had no time for this. Sun Ming, clearly angry, told him that his strength had increased significantly. He warned Shun Yi that if he didn't want to end up lying around with broken bones, he better apologize to Zhao Yibing. Shun Yi, unbothered, calmly explained that it was Zhao Yibing who had come to him first, trying to embarrass him. He took a deep breath, then turned to face her one last time. He gravely declared that she had won this confrontation, and if she wanted to keep bothering him, everything would go exactly how she wanted. With that, he turned and started running, allowing everyone to see the tears that had welled up in his eyes, the expression of genuine sadness on his face. Zhao Yibing stood in stunned silence, watching as the other students began to murmur, wondering if she had just made him cry. Realizing how bad she looked, she rushed after him, calling out that this wasn't what she had meant to do, and that she had never wanted to force him into anything. Sun Ming, not willing to let the situation slide, rushed after Shun Yi as well, threatening to teach him a lesson for his public behavior. Shun Yi, still maintaining his calm, waited until Sun Ming's punch was mere centimeters away before effortlessly dodging it. In an instant, he dove down, grabbing Sun Ming and soaring into the air, performing an incredible maneuver that left the onlookers in awe. The students stood frozen, mouths agape, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Sun Ming, caught off guard by Shun Ye's unexpected agility, was left reeling, unable to respond before Shun Yi finished executing a fluid, precise elven technique. As he landed gracefully, he reminded the students that he had already apologized to everyone involved and asked, coolly, what more they expected from him. The duty officer arrived, asking the students what they were doing and recommending they return to class to continue the exams. With a final glance at the spectacle, the students reluctantly returned to their seats, still buzzing with excitement over Shun Ye's unexpected display of skill. Sun Ming, however, wasn't done. He growled, stating that their rivalry was far from over and that the fire of hostility still burned between them. Later, the scene shifted to the sports ground, where most of the students were playing football. Shun Yi, in the midst of stretching to stay in top shape, was interrupted by Chen Haoyu, who ran up to him. Chen Haoyu grinned, mentioning that the testing was moving slowly, meaning it wouldn't be their turn for a while. He suggested they use the time to grab some comics. Shun Ye's eyes widened in realization. He had forgotten to grab an important note earlier. He sighed and explained that he had a stomachache and needed to step out for a while to take care of it. He quickly left the field, made his way through the school corridor, and entered to the toilet. A few moments later, the killer emerged from a dark corner, silently pleased that his target had finally let his guard down. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. A mysterious silhouette headed toward the toilet where Shun Yi had just been. The attacker was armed with a strange pen, radiating dark energy that signaled imminent danger. Hearing a faint noise, the killer approached the toilet and quickly flung open the door, expecting to find his prey. But the place was empty, leaving the killer confused. Shun Yi had just been there, and now he was nowhere to be found. The killer stood in the doorway, frowning, wondering what had happened. Meanwhile, Shun Yi found himself in the body of an elf, the crown he was wearing having triggered a transformation. With a sudden sense of urgency, he stepped through a summoned gate and entered a new dimension. As he looked around, he realized that the skeleton, his previous adversary, was nowhere to be found. It seemed the creature wasn't patrolling the area. Curious, Shunyi continued his exploration. A short distance away, he spotted the killer's pistol lying on the ground. He approached it, examining the firearm closely. It was fully loaded, and Shunyi noted that it could prove useful for self-defense. He then retrieved his military medal and thought about where the skeleton could have gone. However, he knew he couldn't waste time dwelling on it. He needed to act fast. As he clutched the amulet in his hand, a small portal began to form beneath his feet. The same mysterious voice that had addressed him during his awakening echoed in his mind. The voice told him it could offer no further help but promised one final gift before disappearing. Looking at his hand, Shunyi saw the energy coalesce into a small token, a keepsake that would make traveling between worlds easier. The voice faded, and with it, the creature's presence. Only particles of energy remained in the air, floating for a few moments before dissipating. Shunyi found himself in a strange, unfamiliar place, one that resembled a fantasy world, inhabited by creatures he could scarcely imagine. He felt dizzy, realizing that he had indeed crossed into the elven realm. Examining his hand, he noticed a blade materialize in it. Shunyi guessed that this was the gift the mysterious voice had spoken of. As he tried to steady himself, he heard voices approaching. They belonged to elves who asked who was there. They approached him cautiously, calling him Fern, expressing concern for his well-being and asking how he was feeling. Shunyi stunned. The name startled him. Fern. Was that the elf he had transformed into? The other elves, wearing similar diadems on their heads, greeted him joyfully. One of them explained that if he hadn't arrived, their mission would have been deemed a failure. Shunyi watched them, assessing the situation. These were real elves, no doubt about it, as evidenced by their camouflage attire and the way they moved with purpose. One of the elves said that with Felon's arrival, they now had the trust of the elven tribe, as they were considered soldiers. Shunyi, still adjusting to his new form, reported that he was almost back to his senses and cautiously reached for his tiara. The moment his fingers brushed the diadem, the other elves reacted swiftly, warning him that he should never have taken it off. They explained that removing the crown would expose their cover, ensuring the failure of their mission. Shunyi apologized for his mistake and muttered to himself that the skeleton had previously pretended to be this elf, but now it was his turn to take the role. The elves nodded, recognizing his explanation. They quickly informed him that it was time to head to the elven settlement. They had already lost too much time. Shunyi, now more aware of his surroundings, followed them, noticing how fast they moved. These elves were clearly powerful creatures. As the group reached the village near nightfall, one of the elves spoke up. They needed to gain permission from the chief to proceed, and to do so, they would have to present their medal. After this, the elf turned to Shunyi and reminded him that their mission was to kill the village chief by pretending to be ordinary soldiers. Shunyi, taken aback, asked in disbelief if he really had to kill the village chief, expressing his confusion over why he had been chosen for such a task. The creatures posing as elves immediately became more sinister, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. They coldly inquired why he was questioning the order. Shunyi quickly realized that he had to play along to avoid raising suspicion. With a calculated tone, he muttered that his blade was thirsty for blood. In that moment, he understood that if he outright refused the command, he would be killed without hesitation. He had no choice but to act the part, but deep down, he knew he couldn't follow through with it. He couldn't kill innocent elves who had done nothing to harm him. Yet, in this new reality, survival came first. As they proceeded, the guards stopped them and demanded to see their insignia. Once they complied, the elves' demeanor softened, and they informed them that they would now escort them to meet the village chief. The village was surprisingly cozy and beautiful, nestled in a well-hidden location, as if designed to remain unnoticed for centuries. Shunyi looked around, noticing how the elves lived a modest yet harmonious life. Their homes were simple, but there was an undeniable warmth and charm to the place. He also observed that the elven women were breathtakingly beautiful, their features refined and delicate, like living works of art. After a while, they reached a large ancient tree. The guards informed them that the village chief was already aware of their visit. Shun Ye's companions told him that he should go ahead alone, as they would wait nearby. Still unsure how he had found himself in the middle of a conflict between elves and undead, Shun Yi began to ponder the consequences of their mission. He wondered whether killing the village chief could bring him unimaginable power. He wasn't sure, but his thoughts were interrupted as he moved forward into the village's heart. As he walked deeper into the village, he noticed a dark figure standing in the center of a room bathed in an eerie light. A tall elf, draped in a magnificent cloak that trailed across the floor, was engrossed in a book. As soon as he saw Shun Yi approaching, the elf quickly closed the book with a loud snap. He then turned toward Shun Yi, his eyes glinting with recognition, and smiled warmly. The elf greeted him, expressing his gladness at seeing him and addressing him as a soldier. Shun Yi froze, surprised by the elf's familiarity, but before he could respond, the system activated, revealing new information. The system flashed a message: Protector of the Nightmare World, Great Magician, Fifth World Leader, Ruler of Nature. Shun Ye's heart sank as he processed the titles. This elf was far more than he had expected. He was a figure of immense power, one who seemed to tower over any being Shun Yi had encountered before. In comparison to the overwhelming titles and authority of this elf, Shun Yi felt like nothing more than a small, insignificant insect. Gritting his teeth, Shun Yi realized that killing this elf was impossible. His three companions, who had been so confident in their mission, were no match for the village chief. They might have been stronger than Shun Yi, but even they wouldn't dare challenge someone who held the title of Master of Nature and heir to the throne of the ancient tree. Shun Yi took a deep breath, understanding the gravity of the situation. The power this elf wielded was beyond anything he could handle, and even if he were a brave man, it wouldn't matter. He would never stand a chance against such a formidable opponent. The village chief expressed his gratitude to Shun Yi for his invaluable contribution. He informed him that he could now rest, having earned it, and decided to teleport him to a new location. The chief mentioned that a festive banquet was being held in their honor and urged Shun Yi to enjoy the celebration. Moments later, Shun Yi found himself in a cozy, dimly lit tavern with his companions. The elves told him they could now take a break and mentioned that the target would be joining the banquet a little later, giving them some time to relax. However, Shun Yi, feeling restless, knew that staying in the same situation was merely awaiting death. He realized he had to act quickly. After a while, a charming and sweet elf girl approached him with a smile and asked if he would mind dancing with her. She said it was a great honor for her to dance with a frontline hero who had fought against the undead. Taken by her warmth and beauty, Shun Yi couldn't bring himself to refuse her. He admitted that he wasn't a great dancer, but she reassured him with a smile, telling him she would help him. As they began to dance, Shun Yi realized how relaxed and carefree he felt, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The grace of the elf girl made the moment feel almost surreal. He found himself surprised by her innocence, and for a brief moment, he wished he could escape the looming threat of death. He thought that if it weren't for the undead and their twisted schemes, he could dance with this girl for the rest of his life. Sensing his silence, the girl asked him why he had remained quiet, noting that it seemed the battle had left its mark on him and his comrades. Shun Yi smiled and replied that he was simply a terrible dancer. He then asked her what her name was. She replied with a gentle smile, saying her name was Lanny. Shun Yi then asked if he could perform a magic trick for her, to which Lanny eagerly replied that she would be delighted to see one. She added that, in fact, he danced quite well. As a token of appreciation, she offered him a bracelet, joking that if he disappointed her, he would have to return it. Shun Yi grinned and accepted the challenge, saying he would happily comply. With that, Shun Yi stood on a table, drawing the attention of the crowd, and declared that he would perform an amazing magic trick. Its name, the Great Human Transformation. He announced that he could transform into a human. Lanny supported his claim, urging him to show the crowd, noting that she had never seen such magic in person. The undead elves disguised as regular elves began to murmur among themselves, wondering what their comrade was doing. Some even speculated that he was trying to provoke the village chief into appearing. Shunyi, enjoying the attention, asked everyone to watch closely as he slowly lifted his crown. With a dramatic flourish, he revealed his true form, shocking everyone in the room. He threw the crown toward Lanny, and as it landed in her hands, he returned to his human appearance. He smiled at her, calling her a wonderful girl, and thanked her for the incredible evening. The elves applauded, impressed by his reveal, marveling at his audacity and bravery. But Shunyi knew this wasn't enough. He continued, enjoying the crowd's attention. He stated that he was just a man because he had removed the crown, but that it wasn't all. He pointed to his companions and declared that his brothers possessed similar magic. If they removed their crowns, they would transform into undead. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The elves, now on edge, turned toward Shunyi's companions, eyeing them suspiciously. Some of the elves drew their weapons, demanding that the disguised undead remove their crowns. At that moment, Shunyi summoned a portal and, with a final glance at Lanny, stepped into it. He said that once his three brothers transformed, he would return home. He waved goodbye to Lanny, thanking her one last time for the wonderful time they had shared. Lanny watched in alarm as Shunyi vanished through the portal, while her comrades rushed toward the hiding undead, determined to capture them. A few moments later, an enormous number of tree roots had emerged from the ground, ensnaring the spies who had infiltrated the village for their sinister mission. These roots coiled tightly around their bodies, constricting with such force that escape was impossible. The village chief, with an air of calm authority, declared that the undead had attempted to infiltrate his village but hadn't anticipated a human working on two fronts. The elves, now trapped, had tried to explain that there had been some misunderstanding and that they still had orders to follow. However, as soon as the tiaras were torn from their heads, their true forms were revealed. The chief elf remarked, his voice tinged with awe, that the magic of transformation was embedded in the crowns, and he was amazed by this remarkable technique. He finally added that he owed a debt to the brave man who had decided to help them. The elves, still looking around for Shunyi, had quickly realized he was nowhere to be found. He had vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, Shunyi had no idea that the portal would adjust to its surroundings, but he understood the situation had become precarious. After a brief moment of confusion, he had stumbled upon a skeleton, busy devouring another unfortunate soul who had wandered into this strange world. Approaching the skeletal figure with a disgruntled expression, Shunyi had muttered that he had been fighting while his comrade, with whom he had made a contract, was busy enjoying another feast. Mictlantecuhtli, the skeleton, had responded casually, asking how Shunyi had managed to survive and promising a reward in return. Shunyi, irritated, had replied that he had nearly died because of the crown and was not in the mood to discuss it. Just as the conversation seemed to cool, a scroll had materialized before Shunyi, bearing a powerful undead spell that the other side had prepared for him. Shunyi, unimpressed, had thrown the scroll aside, declaring that he would never sell himself for such an offer. Mictlantecuhtli had explained that the crown of the Pale Shadows had been given to Shunyi because, as a human, he was an ally to the elves, and it would have been fatal for him to go there alone. Another scroll had appeared, explaining that, as an apology, the other party had broken the principles of equal exchange and was now offering the Heritage Crystal, a powerful item that granted 3 undead talents. Mictlantecuhtli had elaborated on the talents. The first, Dark Whisper, allowed one to communicate with the dead and ask them questions. The second, Immortal's Grace, provided temporary immortality for a few seconds when receiving a fatal blow. And the third, Rebirth Fire, allowed one to create a fireball and place it on an undead body to resurrect it after death. Shunyi had pondered the options. Resurrecting the undead had seemed pointless, and he had quickly dismissed that talent. After considering the rest, He had realized that gaining information from the dead would be the most useful tool for his survival and success. He had chosen Dark Whisper. As soon as he had grasped the crystal, a green flash had erupted from it, throwing him aside. Shunyi had grinned, now able to speak with the dead. Mictlantecuhtli, ever curious, had asked if Shunyi had made his choice. The skeleton had also noted that no one had chosen this talent before, as it didn't directly increase combat stats. Finally, the skeleton, intrigued, had asked Shunyi to explain what had truly happened, mentioning that it was very important to him. After hearing the story, the skeleton had remarked that the original target of the murder had been the sacrificed elf. He also noted that the village chief was the most powerful priest. Shunyi had mused to himself that he wasn't surprised the elf had so many titles. Without another word, the skeleton had turned and sprinted off in an unknown direction, leaving Shunyi alone. After a moment, Shunyi, having ensured that his interlocutor was long gone, had summoned the gate. He muttered to himself that every family had its own darkness and decided that he wouldn't be swayed by flattery. Sometime later, Shunyi had gained a new skill, one that allowed him to claim membership in any group by simply stating that he was one of them. The skill, marked with green rarity, seemed incredibly useful. Shunyi had admitted to himself that it was a pretty neat addition to his abilities. He also discovered a nature blessing bracelet that Lanny had given him, with the assurance that it would be quite beneficial. Returning to the real world, Shunyi reflected on his day. He'd acquired a new technique and received the bracelet, so he had considered the day a success. The physical education department had soon announced that a physical skills test would be conducted, with Chen Haoyu being the first participant. As the test began, Chen Haoyu had dashed forward, only for mysterious splashes and strange substances to shoot out of numerous holes. Shunyi had watched closely. He had called out to Chen Haoyu, wishing him good luck. Chen Haoyu had grinned and responded confidently, saying that it was nothing and that he had it under control, before thanking Shunyi for the encouragement. However, his celebration had been premature. In his overconfidence, Chen Haoyu had carelessly gotten splattered with some bizarre goo right in the face. The gym teacher had reported that Chen Haoyu scored 71 points and advised him to be glad it wasn't the real exam. Next, it had been Shin Ye's turn. He was told to prepare thoroughly in order to score as high as possible. When the signal to begin was given, Shunyi had immediately rushed forward, nimbly dodging the obstacles in his path. Watching students remarked that Shunyi had a very focused posture, noting that he moved with the grace of an ice skater. Shunyi had thought to himself that it wasn't too hard and that thanks to the elven items, he could predict where the next attack would come from. Unbeknownst to him, a mysterious man in black glasses had been observing his every move. The man turned to his companion, intrigued by Shin Ye's performance. He remarked that our hero had some serious skills. His companion replied that Shin Yi was their top student. He had missed the first exam, but even so, he remained a strong candidate. The mysterious man nodded thoughtfully, noting Shin Ye's impressive potential, strong physique, and natural talent. He added that if Shin Yi performed well on the spiritual ability test, he would give him a chance. His partner, a chubby man, asked if he intended to have Shin Yi take the spiritual ability test. The man replied that they should wait for the results first to see how Shin Yi scored, explaining that an average score wouldn't be enough to judge his true capabilities. Meanwhile, Shin Yi continued to excel, effortlessly dodging obstacles and clearing the course. With tears in his eyes, the teacher proudly announced that Shin Yi had achieved the highest score on the agility test. As the test concluded, the class was given a break for lunch. Chen Haoyu slapped Shin Yi on the back, grinning, and said he expected nothing less from him. Shin Yi smiled, knowing he had made real progress that day. When Shin Yi returned to his classroom, he felt incredibly fatigued. After a while of attempting to focus on his studies, he realized that concentrating was impossible. His mind began to wander, and it felt as though different memories were clashing inside his head. He reminded himself that he needed to forget the distractions of the ordinary world, especially since he had to focus on a history course. However, before he could fully concentrate, a group of people approached him, interrupting his thoughts. A moment later, Stan, the bully, stormed in and knocked Shun Ye's desk aside with powerful blows. One of the blows struck Shun Ye in the face, and Sun Ming glared menacingly at him, taunting him that he had already warned him, and retribution was coming. Shun Ye looked at Sun Ming in surprise and asked if Zhao Yibing had sent him there. Sun Ming sneered and ordered him not to mention the girl's name. As more people entered the room, Sun Ming boasted about his increased strength, claiming that he had leveled up to level 2 during his absence. He then challenged Shun Ye to compare his strength with his agility. Unfazed by the threats, Shun Ye activated his skill of independence, and the effect was immediate. Sun Ming and his group began to perceive him as a friend and looked at him in confusion, unsure of why they were there. One of the group members muttered that they had come on Zhao Yibing's request and admitted that they didn't really want to fight Shun Ye. Shun Ye quickly processed the information. He knew the skill would only last 10 seconds, but it provided him with the insight he needed. Since the skill could only be used once per day, he decided to absorb it to gain 3 stat points, which he allocated to his strength in order to become a much more formidable warrior. At that moment, one of the hooligans grabbed him from behind in an attempt to restrain him. Unaware of what was about to happen, Sun Ming charged forward, taunting Shun Ye and asking how many ribs he was willing to sacrifice to stop the beating. Sun Ming tried to close the distance and strike Shun Ye's body, but his efforts were in vain. Shun Ye looked at Sun Ming in surprise. Suddenly, Sun Ming felt excruciating pain in his fingers. He jumped back, clutching his hand in horror, realizing that all his fingers had been broken.